Okay. Oh, Sarah's right there. That's other Sarah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to CSDE seminar on this very rainy Friday. We're super excited to have someone from UW coming to talk to us today after we've had a few external speakers. Announcements-wise, please sign in if you're registered for class. Thank you all for submitting to lightning talks for the first time in years. We have more people who have applied than could possibly present in an hour, so that's great. And we'll be getting back to you by Monday with whether you'll be presenting this time or whether we'll encourage you to apply again in winter. So we're really excited, and thank you again to all the students. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Sarah Elwood to introduce our speaker.
They were clapping for all of you who just came in. No, funnily enough, my first quarter on this campus as a faculty member, my first talk was the CSDE lecture.
Oh, really?
Yep. So we move in circles in geography. I'm delighted to introduce to you our beloved new colleague, José Alavez. José is assistant professor of geography. He holds a PhD from Concordia University of Montreal, an MSc in geomatics from the National Council of Science and Technology in Mexico. He joined us after a postdoc position in Healthy Research and Policies Lab at the University of Illinois. You'll see in his talk, José's work sits at the intersection of human geography and the digital geohumanities. He studies migration geographies in the Americas with a mixed methods approach that is assembled from ethnography, geovisualization, data justice, and deep mapping. His work's been funded by the Research Foundation of Quebec, Mexico's National Council of Science and Technology, and some others. He's published in English, French, and Spanish, and has placed his work in outlets like Cartographica, Geohumanities, the Journal of Cultural Geography, and others. I'm just going to say we are so lucky to get to have him with us as one of us on this campus. Welcome, José.
Well, thank you all. I'm thrilled to be here. It's funny because usually I was here in November last year presenting my job talk, and we're in November again. And at one point, you will see why November is special to me for many reasons. Some of them good, some of them bad, but we're gonna go there. So we have 45 minutes. I'm gonna start my presentation just by show you the outline for this one. It's three different sections. The first one is a bit fast, so you can know about me, who I am, where I come from, with who I engage with in terms of research. Then it's gonna be the meat and potatoes of this presentation, my research that I entitled If I Die Far From You, Deep Mapping Grief and Loss in the Concept of Migration. And the third part is also short, but it's gonna talk about, if I have time, my teaching in the geography department and research activities that I contemplating right now. So let's start with the first part of the presentation. And this is a bit what Sarah already asked you, but I want to just go to this slide. And this is mostly not about my academic career. What I want you to see is that I have been moving around for a while. I was born and raised in Mexico City, talking about human geography, then actually geomatics as a way to tell stories with maps. Then, since I didn't know where I can get, how can I engage with these mixed method approaches from ethnography, oral history, and cartography, I was super lucky. I got a chance to go to Concordia University in Montreal and engage with my foreign supervisor, Sebastian Cacard, who does exactly that. And from there, I started building my own way of thinking about this tension and combination of methods and frameworks. That it was really fun that I was then hired as a postdoc in a data visualization field geography lab, usually focus on quantitative research, but they notice that they need a community engagement element, somebody who can bring these amazing dashboards interested with the community. And I was hired and I was really happy. And after that, from Urban Champaign in a couple of months ago here in Seattle. So thrilled to be here and continue my journey. And hopefully I won't stay here for a while because I'm tired. I don't want to just continue moving anymore. But the other thing that I want to tell you is not just this academic traveling. It's also my own personality, my own experience. You see, yes, I was born in Mexico City, but my family, half of it, is from Puerto Rico. So I'm part of what is called the Sunbelt diaspora. Many, as you may know, many Puerto Ricans, for many reasons, have left the island, and they're spread out in the Americas. Most of them, for obvious reasons, in the States, but some others, like my mom, come to Mexico, and I was born there. So the tension between Mexico City, San Juan, Puerto Rico, has always been with me, and I try to explore that with my own research. In one of these frames, it's just a capture of a film where I wrote the script, and it's a script that I call "I Am Going Home," and it's talk about when my mom received the call from San Juan saying that my grandmother died there. So it's these kind of things that really trigger my interest in what I'm doing. With whom I try to engage with, and that's really important for me so you can see this not that looks nice now because of my wife helped me with this, that will be difficult, is that you can see with whom I try to talk with. And you can see that this cartography, Joys of Death, exile and diaspora, Latinx mapping practices, emotion and counter mapping. So it's not just one or the other. These combinations and these tensions help me to start reflecting on my practices, on my processes, and what I want to accomplish with my career in the past, in the present, and in the future. Having said that, I want to enter to the second part and the most hefty part of this presentation, that is my research, the one that I conducted during my PhD, a bit after it. I had a chance to talk about my postdoc, which I could talk a bit, but I want to talk about this because it's with what I want to engage here in UW, with what I want to do. Perhaps, yes, in terms of death and migration, which is something that I am really fascinated, but also in terms of the process. And I want you to just look at it, to focus on how this mapping approach evolves, talks to each other, and who are the participants. That is, in my understanding, is not just a map maker, it's many people. So how this research started? Well, I can tell you that started with a song, a friend, and some theory. So if I die far from you, it's part of a song that is really important for Mexicans, perhaps the most famous one, and goes in Spanish, something like this. I won't sing. It says, México lindo y querido, si muero lejos de ti, que digan que estoy dormido y que me traigan aquí. In English, goes like this. Lovely beloved Mexico, if I die far from you, may they say that I'm asleep, and may they bring me back here. So let's try to unpack together what the mariachi singer is saying, what he's trying to convey. First, if I die from for you, si muero lejos de ti, projection of death. He's still alive, living in diaspora. But he says, like, if I die from Mexico, I want this to happen. And I just need that my body is repatriated, bring back, which triggers a second question that for many diasporic individuals and communities is at the core. Where do I belong? Do I belong in my home country or my host country where I'm living, or my home country where I was born, or both, or three? This is part of what in diaspora studies, transnationalism, we are trying to unpack. Then, in the song, memories, promises, he's asking someone to promise to repatriate the body, something that is intimate. And fourth, even if the song it's just one person, that reality, and I dare to say now more than ever, it's a reality for many exiles and migrants around the world. That's the song. My friend is Eduardo Malpica. Eduardo is a sociologist, and I met him in Quebec in 2016. As many of you, you move to a new city, you don't have any friends, and I move to a city where people speak French, and I just get to know him in a party. He has a master's, and he asked me, "Hey, Jose, what about your PhD? What you're trying to do?" Talking, well, Eduardo, I'm trying to map death and migration, and for that, I think that the best way to do it is to map a cemetery, which I think it's a nice idea. Perhaps I want to do it someday, but he just looked at me and said, you know, I don't know about that. For many immigrants or exiles, that's not the case. Usually they cremate the body, and sometimes the body is repatriated. So the cemetery for sure can give you something, but and also cemeteries are expensive, so that's also that. And Eduardo shared with me his story, and he told me that you know my mom died in Quebec, and she asked me to send her body back to Peru, to Lima, and I'm planning to do it, and he did it. But this talk with Eduardo helped me to see how death is not stillness in the course of migration. Death is also mobility. Death is also a postmortem. It could be a postmortem migration, which brings the academic rationale. And in this slide, I want you to notice the year of this quote. That is 2023, 2 years ago. So it's funny that we're talking about this, even though migration has been with us since forever. And the tension between migration and mobility, and death and stillness. So it's like they cannot be together. But you will tell me, perhaps in this presentation, I will try to counter this tension, and I will try to just engage with Abril Madrel and others that have been exploring the same. How? Well, people usually, when talk about death and perhaps migration, there are two big topics: the body, as I was mentioning, and cemeteries, where people was buried, where. But then when you start unpacking more topics, you start to see other approaches. You see artifacts, perhaps a watch, perhaps a clock, something that brings the memories of the deceased loved one, ceremonies in diaspora, social networks in terms of trust and support and care, websites that can celebrate and mourn people from afar. And as I said, memories and emotions. So you see there's many topics that interact with each other, some of them in bigger scale, some of them in lower scale, but they are part of the same geographies of death and migration. So the question here is that how we put those in conversation. And one geographer and one, she's an anthropologist, but also she talks about literature. Catherine Bishop and Abril Madrel said, like, well, you know, deep mapping could be a way to engage with these multi-layered pieces of migration, grief, and remembrance. So how deep mapping can help us to understand context depth in the concept of migration, how we can engage with it. Well, the first thing, and it took me ages to really see where I was going, is to try to see what's deep mapping, which is funny when I am now talking with students that they told me that I do deep mapping, and it's like, which one of those? Because there's many. So you in this slide you can see 3 blocks. In your upper left, it's a work from Dennis Wood, and he used his own flavor of deep mapping to capture the meaning, and I dare to say the soul of a small town in North Carolina. What you see is a map of the pumpkins, the jack-o'-lanterns, and what he says, like, okay, I want to see how people experience Halloween. And for that, I want to map these pumpkins. But I'm going to erase the base layer. I'm going to erase any other physical traits that just the light that the pumpkins emit. And that's what's his way to just conceive the experience and the emotion of walking in the neighborhood. In your upper right, it's part on a novel, a book that is nonfiction, but it's called Prairie Earth, a deep map. And people say that that's the first mapping exercise. There are others that say that it is not. But what I want to say about this project is that it was written by Edward Hitlis Moon, an indigenous writer. And what he did was putting on the table a map of a place in Kansas. In the table, he used a Sharpie or a pencil, and he just create 9 different quadrants. And he said, you believe that in this prairie, nothing happens, but I'm gonna show you that it's special. So he started walking in this quadrant and talking with people and engaging with the archives and visit places and start to creating his diary sort of notes. And after that, he wrote a book. And he said, like, I'm gonna show you, and I show you in this book why these places have deep meaning. So it's a really beautiful process of creating understanding place. And the below, and the framework below, that's mostly the more techie way of thinking about deep mapping, and usually in GIS is the one that people engage with, is we have many layers. We have a big server, and in these layers, we're gonna bring everything, the kitchen sink about places. We're gonna bring data about environment, physical terrain, music, photos, and we're gonna bring the depth of places by doing so. Which one is the better? Well, I don't know. That's up to you. I have my own ideas, but I have my own flavor as well, which is what I did. And what I did was 3 different exercises to tackle 3 different geographies in the concept of migration. The first one is mapping bodies and networks using a conventional cartographic software. The second one is mapping post-mortem intimate geographies. And the third one is mapping memories. Each one, I dare to say, cannot be understood without the other. Each one talks to each other. Each one responds to each other. So it's a dynamic experience and process. So I want to start by going with the first project. Mapping posthumous mobilities, of the body and social networks. So how it started? It started with the big problem of my thesis. The lack of data about posthumous mobilities. So you see, I arrived my second year with my supervisor and said, like, I want to do this. He told me, yeah, for sure, should be something internet. I started looking in the census and other databases, nothing. And then I was a bit, as many of us doing the PhD, don't know what to do, but I found a blog from a social worker online. Her name is Javorka, he was a student like me, and he tried to unravel the same things that I want to study. So I wrote to her and Javorka, I want to do this. I don't know how. She was kind enough to have coffee with me and she explained to me, well, that doesn't exist, man. Like, But she told me I'm part of this research group that are trying to understand data migration, and perhaps you can join us. And the rest was history. I joined them. I told them that I was a map maker. I map stories. And they told me, well, why don't you map the interviews that we conducted and we see what they look like? And that was perfect. Let's start exploring that. And I suggest to use Atlasine, the version 3, which is not longer supported, but I think it's lovely. Atlasine, it's a software that is used to map stories. And I said, well, let's see what we have if we map the stories conducted by MECMI, by UCAM, with this software. And I'm going to show you that. So this is the first part of the story, a story that for many migration scholars, and for many of us, it's pretty much natural. So it's a story of Rabia and Rahim. They are a couple that met in Afghanistan. In blue, you see the story of Rahim. In yellow, the story of Rabia. In green, when they get together. They get together, they form a family, and then civil war started in Afghanistan. And they decide to move for the sake of their family. So they moved to Yemen, London, and arrived in Canada. And when they arrived in Sherbrooke, they believed they were safe. But a few months later, Rahim had an accident, and he was in his deathbed. And he told to Rabia, Rabia, it's your choice if you stay in Canada or if you go back to Afghanistan or Pakistan or anywhere. For me, the children need to be safe. Now all the decisions are yours. But please send my body back to Afghanistan. And Rabia said yes. Rabia said it was not easy for me, but it was his decision and his last wish. And then the map creates the body of Rahim coming back. As you can see, the map, the body is blue because Rabia stayed in Quebec and is living there. But aside of the story, I want just to take a few seconds to see the map without what I just say. And how the map, in a way, is telling us something. The map is telling us that it's not easy to see when story started and when it finished. It's the tension that it's often study and speak in transnational studies. Home and away is not easy to see. What else I mapped? I was mapping another story, and then this quote came. It was from Lenka, an exile from Serbia that after the war in the Balkans, she left. And she said, when her husband Dragomir died in Quebec, I received condolences. I still remember the calls from his friends and family and people who haven't seen since the war. It was very touching to speak with people we have known in another life. So the map at that point is really interesting because you start mapping and then sadly there's the disease, but then other places around the world start to emerge, and I call them the post-mortem migrant archipelago. It's like they just show Australia, the States, England, places that they were mentioned before, emerged at that point. So how they look like? This is going to be really fast. This is Rabia and Dragomir, Rabia and Rahim. It looks like this, or not. Well, I will try to do it again, and if not, well, usually it moves. Take my word for it. But it's the idea of the mobility and how death really triggers another post-mortem migration. So what we have from here, conclusions. The map show death triggers mobility. Death is not about stillness. Death is another way of migration. It's also depicting not just the body, it triggers networks of solidarity and convey attention between, in migration between home and away, home and host countries. But it also, and that's when deep mapping started, challenges. One, ethical issues in terms of pinpointing how migrants move in the world. And we know that this is really serious in this age. So I want to tell you that my map was a bit changed in order to respect the wishes and of the storytellers. So of course, the story is the same, but it didn't happen in Afghanistan, happened in other places. So the meaning is there, but I want to respect, and we want to respect, me and I, how it worked. But the other one, it was really more meaningful for me. That is that I already talked to you about the deathbed. I talked to you last wishes, and a Cartesian representation using circular lines is too simple to represent those memories and intimate experience. The dying event, a funeral, a ceremony. So how we can engage and create another mapping project that can tackle that. And that's what the second mapping project started, mapping intimate spaces of death in the context of migration. And I had the help of a good friend of mine. She's an artist and a lovely cartographer, Elise Olmedo. So there are two things, meaning, and the other thing is that we have places that cannot be associated with coordinates. People talk about home. People talk about a funeral parlor, a church, a chair, a bed, and those are mappable. Those are places, but we cannot use GIS to map them. We need something else. So in order to do so, I engage with other practices. One of those was sensitivity mapping, and Elise Olmedo, who was a postdoc at Concordia, helped me with that. And this is a story that I mapped using that. And it's the story of exile, Eric, who died at home. And this story was narrated by Paul. When I was reviewing the story, most of the story was about this event that I want to tell you. And I create the map. And I'm going to tell you the story as good as I can. The map is this, and I want to unpack it while I'm telling the story. So the story is the following. Eric was a student. He arrived from Senegal to Quebec to start his undergrad. He was hosted by a friend of family, Paul. And one day at 10 p.m., after being with his friends, Eric arrived home. He arrived home, knocked at the door of Paul's studio. Paul was an academic. He's an academic, sorry. And say, hey, Paul, I arrived. I go to bed. I am really tired. And Paul said, yeah, sure. I'm going to continue working. See you tomorrow for breakfast. That was the night. 10 a.m. All the family is taking breakfast. Eric is not there. Paul thought, well, he's tired. He was just with his friends. No worries. Family goes, work, school. Paul stay at home to continue preparing his classes, his research. At 2 p.m., Paul is leaving home. At the door, he saw Eric boots. And as you can imagine, in Montreal, in winter, it's really cold. And you cannot leave your home without some boots. He knew that something was wrong and was odd, because if the boots were there, Eric was there. So he just called, say, Eric, are you here? No response. He walked towards Eric's room, knock at the door, Eric, are you there? No response. Open the door, walk. He saw Eric in his bed, touched him, and at that point he knew that Eric died. Paul enters in a state of shock, try to know what to do, call a friend, call the ambulance, and at that point, at night, he knew that he needed to do something really difficult, to call to Senegal, to Belgium, to talk with Eric's parents and tell them the news. So this map represents that. How the map has, as you can see, 3 different sections and what I call different temporalities. The first temporality is what I call, on your phase of time, called chronos. And chronos is our time. I know that I need to finish soon, so I need to finish at 1:15. I know that at 3:30 I have a meeting with my colleagues. We know that we have a watch, we have ways to count. But then there's another time that is kairos, and time that we just feel, that we know that is there, but we feel it differently. It could be too slow, it could be too fast, it could be too challenging, but we know that it's there. And that's the crux that I portray in this map. And the third part is what a social worker called Jen Rashidi called a metaphorical shockwave. And she said that oftentimes, well, always, when somebody from afar calls a loved one, there's a shockwave that really moved them because they know that a loved one died, but they just cannot travel. They need to wait. And this is just circling back. This is how I felt when my grandmother died in Puerto Rico. So once again, contribution and challenges. Contributions for most geographies in the concept of migration are also intimate and ephemeral. It's not just about this transnational movement. It's also small spaces, everyday places. It's composed by intimate spaces as artifacts home, and I argue that is as important as transnational migration. Another one is like, it's a slow process, and for many of us, students, professors, that's something that is not natural. Like, we need to be productive, but sometimes you need to be slow to understand. You need to engage and try and create different sketches and maps to go there, and that's part of the process. That's a part of research. But the main challenge here is the following. This map shows an event that happened in one day. And for academics, grief is a process that lasts years and is always ongoing. And how we can map that. That's the third project, and it's mapping as mourning. And that was with 2 exiles, Alicia and Amelia, but it was also triggered by my friend Eduardo. So Eduardo was living in the winter of 2022. He was going to Trois-Rivières, a small town in Quebec. He was moving, he found a position there as a professor. And one day he called me and said, hey, I'm leaving, so could you help me with the boxes and just empty my apartment? I said, for sure, Eduardo, let's do it. And we were just doing that. And at one point we sit in the stairs and he asked me about my research again. And I told him, well, I'm stuck with this idea of grieving as a process, I don't know. And he told me, well, what about this thing that you do in Mexico that is called an ofrenda? And perhaps many of you know what it is. I do that every year, with some friends, and perhaps that could help you. And I was thinking, well, what about if we map an ofrenda, how that would look like? So I started thinking about it. And that was the idea. Mapping an ofrenda. It's based in the idea of continuing bonds. Every time when somebody died, class and colleagues said that we still have a link with them. We still remember them. We still think about them, even if they're not present. And those bonds could be by proxy, using some memento, imagination, thinking that they're with us, virtual, by visiting perhaps a website, or physical, we visit the grave. Those are the different bonds that connect to each other. And I try to think how mapping could help to enhance those bonds. But before I present that, I need to just put you up to speed. I know that you know, many of you, but what's an ofrenda? So how you map it? Well, an ofrenda is an altar that in Mexico we create every November 2nd. My sister and my mom just send me theirs. It's usually what we do in order to honor and remember our loved ones. This ofrenda is ofrenda of Alice and Eduardo. And maybe every year they are together, create an ofrenda in Montreal. Alice is from Mexico, Eduardo from Peru, they have people from Argentina, and they start putting different items in the altar. At the end, they talk about these altars, these items, saying, hey, well, these are the dice or the cigar of my grandfather that I bring from Argentina. This is food that my mom used to eat back in Peru. And that's of the ofrenda to your conversations. And I think how a map can replicate that, or could replicate that if it's possible. So Amelia helped me to do so, and we co-create this map. So Amelia, tell me the story, her story. Amelia is an exile from Colombia that lives in Montreal currently. And she told me that she was one day coming back home from the university, and she received that call that we have been talking about. And the call was from her sister saying that her dad just passed away in Colombia. Amelia had a ticket to travel to Colombia in 2 weeks. So he just ran to the airport, go to talk with the I don't remember which aircrafts were, but talk with the people and say, hey, could you just exchange this ticket? I need to leave now. And they said, no, it's impossible. So she returned back home with her ticket. And in the metro, she's listened to a song. And she told me that at that point, she imagined her father next to her, talking to her. And she said that her father said like, hey, mija, I'm okay, I'm good. And Amelia said like, well, Dad, that's the song that I want to show you when you visit me. And they start having this conversation that Amelia had in different places in Montreal. And we mapped them. At one point, in the middle of this mapping process, COVID struck. And when you finish your PhD, you panic, but sometimes things happen for a reason. And Amelia was stuck in Colombia that day. And Amelia told me, well, Jose, my sisters want to be part of the project. Could they? And I was really thrilled, like, for sure. So they start interviewing each other and talking about their father. And that was a way that Amelia started to reliving and recreating these continuous bonds. And this is a place where Lucy, Amelia's sister, is talking about this space next to the river where her father used to sit and watch himself after working on the field. And then after having these conversations, something else happened. And somebody else in another place in Colombia knew about the project and say, hey, and this is Adrian, Amelia's nephew. They're like, well, I want to just play this song for Abuelo. And he started playing a song. And the maps start to create these memorials, small different processes and experience of just grieving together. And that start to highlight how in the concept of migration, people can start recreating these continuous bonds and be with each other, even if they are from afar. So in the mapping of ofrenda, contributions, these bonds are also spatial. It brings different locations together and can articulate different experiences together. But the map is not just this altar, spatial one. it's also a way to trigger memories and stories that we can share together. The other part, and it's funny, I was talking with a librarian today about that, is the hosting part, is that we rely on technology, and if you want to create this in a digital way, somebody needs to host them, these memories. And sometimes when you host on the cloud, when you host on a server, that could change. If you are talking with an enterprise, with the private sector, they could change the way of engagement, the cost, and then you are in a really difficult and precarious position. So there's a challenge there. Different things happen, and I want to just go there because when you think that you finish your mapping project, things never, oftentimes they didn't finish, still ongoing. And that happened when I finished my project. I was, I was happy with it. But then Amelia contacted me and said, hey, Jose, so look, the map that you and I created, I finally got the chance to show it to my family. And he showed me the photos. So you have seen the 3 photos that Amelia showed me. On the left, it's Amelia in Quebec, with talking with her family. You can see it in Zoom. In the middle, it's Amelia's mother that is listening to the story and remembering her late husband. And on the right, it's a photo from Amelia's cousin who lives in Germany. So the map at that one point, I felt really, really, really happy that first, it was still alive without my own creation. It's still part of Amelia's family altar and way of honor her father. But I told you at the beginning, and it's always November, and it's gloomy, and it's hard for me. But each November, it's one of those months that become difficult because it's a month that my friend Eduardo Malpica died. But the thing with Eduardo and how he died, it's really particular and really painful. So Eduardo, living in Riviera, at one point he went to having a drink. He was an activist, so he went to his collective, had a drink, and he was attacked by white supremacists in Quebec. And he disappeared for 6 months. And then his body was finally found and returned in the shores of the San Juan's River. I'm telling you this story for many reasons. First, because it's also part of my own grieving, but also because now that we're talking about data, we're talking about mapping. If you go to the archives in Quebec of the police, Eduardo is considered somebody who disappeared and was found. But Eduardo was on record being attacked in the bar. Eduardo suddenly was really afraid of water and was found on the river. Eduardo left the bar without a jacket, which is impossible in the frozen tundra of Quebec. So those things, they don't fit. And Chloe, her wife, was and has been gaslighted since that day. So, as happens, I needed to create another map. And this map was mostly for me because I needed to grieve my friend. And it's a map that I call how to deep map forced disappearance in the course of migration. And it's based on this quote from Avery Gordon that I want to read. It's, they disappeared, have lost all social and political identity. No bureaucratic records, no funerals, no memorials, no bodies, nobody. And that happened to Eduardo for 6 months. We didn't know what happened. If you read my last paper, Mapping Ofrenda, he's in the acknowledgements, even though that he disappeared. And I refuse to acknowledge that. I was just thinking that I will see him again, so I'm in this type of denial because you don't want to accept it. So the paper was, I had notes from the final notes from my editors a couple of weeks ago. So this is going to happen in 2026. Hopefully I will have the chance to share it with you. And I have just a few moments to reflect. And I want just to go that what's deep mapping for me. Deep maps for me are way more than representations. They are sounding boards. They help us to understand, but they are actors. As I say with Amelia, they help me. They are active. They have agency. They talk to us. They mobilize us. Deep mapping for me is this a way to put in conversation different methodologies, different map makers, different communities, different actors, different scholars. It's not something that we cannot do it alone. As I said with Eduardo, it's a never-ending and non-replicable process. And there's something there that is missing, but I just want to take 3 minutes to tell you what I am right now. When you work with communities, you don't get, well, I think I want to think that I don't want to put an agenda. I don't want to say we're going to do this. And that happened to me when I was in Chicago. And when I was talking with the Latinx community there, they wanted to map and talk environmental justice, which, if we think together, is really tied to death, the cost of migration. In Chicago, there's heat waves, redlining, noise, pollution, and usually the communities that are more affected with or by these different things are minorities, and in Chicago, the Latinx communities. So we started mapping together. And the process was, so the project were going really, really well. But then, as you can imagine, in Chicago, after January, everything stopped. And we are trying to reconnect, at least with one of those projects, because I think that communities need to take care of themselves, and we are trying to just honor that and try to be there for them. There was another project, and I will have the chance to talk with, I will talk with CSD about how find funding and how all the ins and outs. But there's another project, and I want you to talk about it. This happens after my job talk. We're talking about environmental justice as well. So we had everything together. Everyone was in charge. We were in this beautiful studio of a muralist in Little Village. And then we are about to travel from Urbana to Chicago. And then they told us that ice would be outside. And we didn't know what to do. But I just want to say that the community said, like, we need to do this because it's important for us. We need to just reclaim more lives. We need to reclaim more projects. We need to be part of it. And in this workshop, we didn't map. We just draw, and the students draw butterflies and tell stories, and it was nice. It wasn't about, I think that is research, but it wasn't about environmental justice as mapping. It was mostly placemaking that in many, many, many ways, I think that's more important. The other project that I really want to engage with, and this is mainly coming and going from Eduardo, is to deep map enforced disappearance in North America. There are many places that I engage in this topic. I don't want to go further because things need to be better articulated, and I try to not say things until I really talk with the communities in depth. But this one to do. But also, just to leave it here, when we talk about disappearance and enforced appearance, death for sure is one of them. But I want you to reflect that also disappearance is like when communities are not part of our public space, when they are afraid of going there, when sometimes, as you can see in the news, we don't know where they are, and they sometimes appeared in another country on a cell. Or so this part of it, but also it's part of being to have hope, because I think that this is not what's happening right now. It's happening in the Americas since forever. It's happening in Mexico with the Guerra Sucia. It's happening in Chile. It's happening in Argentina. It's happening in many places. And communities are resilient and they work together. So I think that that's another part of it. We need to think about it. Not that's just happening right now here or in Canada or Mexico. I think that as a map maker, I try to think about the Americas as something else that needs to challenge what many people talk or call the methodological nationalism. 2 more slides just to finish. My current courses in geography, if you all want to join us, the next one is in winter, and it's mostly about what I'm trying to acknowledge here. That knowledge is not about just academia, it's not about being in these rooms, it's also listen to communities. And the 3 of them, I try to build them that way. In winter, I want to teach cultural landscapes of Latin America. And in spring, there's a great seminar that is called Yours of Death, based on my own dissertation, and a 200 course that is called Latinx and Latin American Cartographies, that is going to be really hands-on. It's going to be a bit of theory, but it's going to be also a workshop. And last slide, and I want to just leave my presentation here. And it's mostly in terms of this amazing writer from Uruguay, Mario Benedetti, who was an exile. And he tried to talk about the death of his dear friend Luis. And he said, we should remind ourselves that among the many cliches of the capitalist world surrounding the business of death, it's often said that is the final abode. And yet, for a comrade like Luis, where we are leaving him today will in fact prove to be his penultimate abode, because his final resting place will always be within us, in our affection and our memory. And took a bit more time, but that's the final slide. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It's all still sinking in, but one thing that I was really about was this idea of mapping as a sensitivity as opposed to a method. And then I guess I'm curious if you can help me unpack the bridge there. And I guess I say that as somebody who's also thinking about, I want to take your call to think about how applying these approaches might help me understand the topics that I'm interested in. And I'm just curious, does one just get started and see how they become oriented to a space? What does it mean to have a sensitivity as opposed to a method?
I think that.
Oh, also, if you can repeat the question.
Oh, yeah. So for the people online, so the question, it's how we can unpack this idea of mapping as a sensitivity opposed to a method. Correct? So that's interesting. And I think that it's something I want to unpack in my future research and this one trying to do, because I think that thinking about mapping as a method is really Western oriented. It's like we believe that that's mapping. But if we go to the global South and how the colonial perspective about mapping have engaged with, it's I think that's a method. It's sounded scholarly like it, but also you cannot at all leave the map maker and the people that you are mapping with outside the process. And I think that that's the important part of it. In a way that while you're mapping, you are asking, you are talking, and that's the research itself. Whereas when you are just creating a method that you are aiming for a final representation and you present a map, it could be just showcase somewhere. It could be part of a website, it could be a vignette in a paper. But how the map was built or the sketch at the time you created are part of the accessibility that is important. So sometimes, at least for me, the process is way more important than the final outcome because it's what helped me to reflect about all the things that happen. Usually, that's the hard part when you're presenting this because then it's like you have limited time to present the final part of it. But then it's like all the things, in fact, just to finish, the final part of my dissertation was all the sketches that I created and all the mistakes that I committed in order to better understand what's happening. Indeed.
So I was just wondering, like the mapping inevitably makes some visible and some obscure. So how do you manage the politics of visibility, right? Like is one form of repetition, but can also be reproduction of harm.
Yeah, that's great. So maps always highlight something, hide other things, and the question is how I manage to choose or pick what's highlighted and what's not, and how to just and what's the final part of the question.
Yeah, so it's like not a reproduction of harm.
Yeah, and no, there's no repercussion of harm. Great question. So for me, that was the key component of my dissertation. And in fact, I was presenting yesterday with the social workers that helped me to create this project. And they were great to just help me do that. First of all, I think that as I said, I tried to map with somebody else. Not just to have that caution. It's just to have these conversations. When you're mapping the story of somebody else, you try to just listen to that, highlight that. When I was mapping with the social workers, they use this word that is accompany somebody. Use the map as a method to be with somebody. So the map is not just we want to map the story and that's it. So they're using the map still to say like, hey, this happened to Rahim. It's also your story. So the map becomes something else. It's not about just representing the story. It's also to bring these other ways of accompany or create collective mourning among us. So oftentimes your question always brings to my head, like what's in my head. It's like why I'm doing this, what I'm thinking, why I'm presenting. And the other part is it's difficult to say, but it's just going back to feminist epistemologies and say like I'm mapping like this because I am seeing this as who I am. Perhaps yes, as a diasporic subject, but also it's like when I'm talking about disappearance. There are things that I ignore, and I could feel ashamed of that or not. Well, I am many times, but it's like being a professor in Seattle, and sometimes I disappearing in Mexico in terms of what happened in Ayotzinapa, happening to these people. I cannot just map that just like that. I don't have the capacity in terms of I could know the ins and outs of the software. That's not enough at all. Like you need to engage with the communities to order. And then sometimes I'm going to say like, I don't want this to be public, and you need to honor that. It is way that's a challenge, but also it's what we need to embark on. We need to acknowledge that. Yeah.
So we were discussing that. But maybe it reminded me how Shadow Genesis is that very familiar?
No, tell me.
Okay, yeah. So this is library Genesis. That's what's at all. It's pirated copies of textbooks and papers. Basically, it's saying that information should be.
Okay, yeah.
And the reason these websites.
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah. The reason these websites are so hard to take down is because they're not hosted by a Microsoft.
Right.
Because if you centralize in one place, it takes one lawsuit by someone who can form lawyers, and it's on. The reason these things are reliable is because they can be mirrored. In fact, people make software. I can Google, how Google, how do I make a mirror of, as in a copy of library Genesis so that I can use it. And I think that if this mapping, and if this mapping exercise would be resilient, it can't have that one point of failure being a big tech.
Right.
Especially one in one country. Like you gave an example earlier of Chile. I think that's a great example of a country where the political situation change and the attitudes of the country can change in a way that's some information is no longer.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was wondering if you thought about resiliency of that.
Mm.
How maps can be spread. Because if you tell like the people in these communities, like, hey, here's a software, copies my entire map, and pay for web hosting if you like. It's $5 a month.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is about the resiliency of mapping and how we can have different places where it can be hosted or entry points in order for the map to have some resiliency. That's a good question, but I believe it's a good question for any project in terms of mapping, activism, and storytelling for sure. I think that it depends of the goal of the mapping project. In the case of Amelia, for example, that's something that you want to share. And now that I'm saying that, it's funny because I have the other question, the other part of the question that they told me like what happens if people don't want to share. And that's the thing. It's the grieving experience. It could be personal. It could be something that they want to have for them. Do they want to make it fully public? Yeah, I know that your question is still stands. But it's like I wanted to be in a survey like this or something like that. Who knows? It depends. But if you're talking about activism and perhaps you're saying something with a map or doing something about counter mapping, then your point stands. We need to be really, really, really methodological on having these different entry points. And it had happened, right? Like if there's a change of regime and you want to create a map, and then they say like this cannot be hosted there, how we can host them in another place to showcase the argument or showcase the data. It's really interesting. But I think that it's way more than a broader. It's a broader discussion, which needs to be said but I think that is for each individual project. I think sometimes in mapping is like that. And in fact, the maps that I showed you, for example, they were recordings of the map, that were like in different computers, but it wasn't hosted somewhere.
Well, thank you. We're out of time, but I know there was another question, but you can visit with Jose after and.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so